welcome to Money, Money, Money. I'm Surabhi Upadhyay. Earlier in August, the Supreme Court came out with a landmark judgment. The reason I call it landmark is that it finally brings out complete clarity on the rights of a daughter when it comes to ancestral family property. The daughter has been equated with the son now, and the daughter has co-partnery rights by birth. What does this really mean? Will it impact all current settlements? Does it mean more disputes in old cases? Does the date of birth of the daughter matter? And how can families ensure that there is minimum dispute and maximum clarity when they are looking at their succession planning? That's what we will talk about over the next half an hour. And joining in to demystify the slightly complicated subject is Neha Pathak, who looks at estate planning at Motilal Oswal Wealth Management. And I also have with me Mr. Rajesh Saluja, who is the MD and CEO of ASK Wealth Advisors. Thank you very much, lady and gentlemen, for joining us on this important conversation on this episode of Money, Money, Money. Now, Neha, first to you. The first question that came to my mind as well is that there have been so many judgments on this issue. So what judgment is this? Does it overlap with something else? Tell us first on exactly why this becomes such a critical verdict from the Apex Court.
So, Surabhi, as you said that this is a landmark judgment. Actually, this judgment has been passed by a three-judge bench, which actually was constituted because there were different conflicting views that were given by Supreme Court and different benches of the Supreme Court. And that is why this judgment came in by a three-bench judge, which actually gave a lot of clarity to people, where there was a lot of confusion that there was an amendment of Hindu Succession Act in 2005. So to give clarity that what are the rights of a daughter as a co-partner, whether she is going to be a co-partner, she will have the same rights as liabilities as a son before the amendment or after the amendment, or during the amendment she has to be alive or not alive. All those confusions were set aside by this judgment. So this was a very, very important judgment when we talk about women's right in India.
Got that. But Neha, we promised that we'll keep it very simple, even for someone who's never gotten into legal matters. So I have to ask you the most basic question. Define a co-partner for our viewers.
All right. So I will give my example. So I am a daughter, so this is going to be very relevant. So I am a daughter. I'm born to my father. If my father has got two sons and two daughters, before the amendment, co-partner, so there's something called a Hindu Succession Act in India, which defines the succession of Hindus and how the succession will be defined for Hindus. So when we talk about how and who are going to be the part of who will be the heirs of my father, it will be before the amendment only his sons. But after the amendment of 2005 of Hindu Succession Act, it is a daughter as well as sons. So if my father has two sons and two daughters, all four of us will have equal rights in his properties. So whatever ancestral property that my father has, we all will have equal rights. Earlier, only sons got that.
Yeah, okay, that makes it very, very clear. Let's go across to Mr. Saluja as well. Mr. Saluja, thanks for joining us on the show. So, sir, as Neha was just explaining, we had the Hindu Succession Act, we had the amendment in 2005, and then there were subsequent rulings, and some of them had conflicting verdicts. In your experience, what is it that you come across? Is this issue a source of a lot of conflict when it comes to planning, whether it's retail families or even HNI families?
Yes. So, firstly, I think it's a message that the Supreme Court is sending. If you see the statement they've mentioned, a daughter remains a loving daughter all through her life, while a son is a son until he gets a wife. So I think the message is that parents need to keep this in mind while creating a succession plan or a will related to both ancestral and their own property. So I think it's a message for change in mindset. And the big challenge always that we've experienced, firstly, property being a costly asset has often been the epicenter of a lot of disputes. And some of the reasons for increase in such disputes other than greed is ignorance related to the nuances of laws and their rights. So many people actually don't understand the definition of ancestral property or the difference between what is ancestral and what is self-acquired. So laws are different for both, and hence proper legal counsel should be sought before creating a will, trust, or even going to court. Property also includes not just real estate, but business, jewelry, paintings, anything, which is financial in nature is a part of ancestral property. So I think we've seen a lot of disputes that happen within families, a lot to do with ignorance about, what is ancestral property and what are their rights. So I think with some of these, new amendments and new judgments coming in, one message is clear that son and daughter are on the same footing when it comes to at least ancestral property, and they have the same rights and liabilities with retrospective effect. And second, of course, it will open up more discussions, debates around what is ancestral and what is not, so that, before going to the court, you can really have clarity and you avoid disputes. And by the way, another part of the judgment that has come in is that all pending court cases need to be decided within the next 6 months. So that again is going to, solve a lot of disputes that have been going on for some time.
Okay. Okay, you've raised some very important points. So let's take it back to Neha for some more clarity. So Neha, understanding the scope of this judgment and where it's applicable becomes really important, right? As Mr. Saluja is saying, is it applicable only to ancestral property? In that case, property that was perhaps partitioned or, old cases which go back, let's say 10 years ago, can there be a challenge raised now? If I'm a daughter and I didn't get a share in ancestral property, now can I raise a challenge because of this judgment?
So see, there is no straight yes or no answer to your question. Actually, if one has to say that if there are going to be more disputes around this particular judgment, and if 10 years back there was a partition, was that partition made? Did you consent on that partition? All those things have to be looked at. However, if one is looking at the fact that is the daughter going to get her right? So one has to look at after 2005, was the partition done before December of 2004 or before the December of 2004? So after or before has to be seen. A lot of other nuances have to be seen, but this time the court has made it very, very clear that whether the daughter was alive, not alive, she was born in that family, she gets the right in that family. So that way, court has been very, very clear on this part.
Okay, so the date of birth of the daughter is immaterial. What about the date of death of the father? Because I think in the previous amendment, in the 2005 amendment, there were some riders. It had to follow or fall within a certain date, failing which the daughter would not get rights.
Whether the daughter was alive or not, whether the father was alive or not, it doesn't matter. Till the time daughter is born in that family, she is a kopasna. She gets a right in the family ancestral properties.
Okay.
So court has made it very, very simple to understand this time.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Now, Mr. Saluja, just to understand this very clearly, we know that this is applicable to ancestral property. It's not going to be applicable to the property of a father or even a mother if they acquire that property with their own money. I mean, I'm just trying to drive home the point that you made, the difference between ancestral property, self-acquired property, and what really is ancestral inheritance. How are you and your teams interpreting this?
Right. So self-acquired property is where a father has inherited, let's say, some property through a will, or bought a piece of land or house, or started his own business with his own money, so with self funds and not family funds. In this case, the person who has the self-acquired property can actually will it to anyone. It is not necessary that he give it to son or equal with son or daughter. It's his choice. And to that extent, the daughter is on a weaker ground here when it comes to self-acquired property. So that's one big difference. While when you look at ancestral property, it is defined as one that is inherited up to 4 generations of male lineage and should actually have remained undivided through this period. And it also is applicable for descendants up to 3 generations, be it daughter, son, each one has a equal share. Of course, it gets subdivided in each generation, but that's a big difference. Ancestral is what has been passed on and is not been acquired by your own, while self-acquired property is something you have made as an individual. So the laws are different. If a person who's acquired property on his own or set up a business or bought some land, dies intestate without making a will, then all the heirs have an equal right, be it a son or a daughter or whatever else. But if he's made a will and he's put that will in someone's name, then it cannot be contested. So I think the point I was making, there is a difference between ancestral and self-acquired property. And even if someone is creating a will or creating a trust or wants to create one or create a succession plan, this has to be kept in mind. And after this judgment, we are going to see, a lot of reworking that may be required, where if someone assumed an X amount of share coming to him through ancestral property, now may have to take a relook at it, because even the daughter may have a right to it. So it has to be all reworked, be it a will or a trust, with regards to this new amendment.
Okay, got that point. Well, we do need to take a break on that note. On the other side, the conversation is going to continue, and we will talk about exactly this. Why is it so important to have a will or create a trust structure to ensure that disputes in the family are minimized? Is there a real advantage of getting into a trust? Can the affluent urban Indian, not just the HNI, can this affluent urban Indian also look at the trust route or not? All those questions are answered after this break. Welcome back. You're with us on Money, 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 and this week we are discussing the landmark Supreme Court judgment that puts daughters on par with sons when it comes to ancestral property. But Neha, my question is this: ancestral property, you've made the situation quite clear. As Mr. Saluja explained, if the father is alive, then he can choose to give away his assets to whoever, not a son, not a daughter, maybe to a third party completely. It's entirely his discretion. But what happens if the owner of that self-acquired property passes away without a clear will? Then who can stake claim? Then what is the daughter's position in such a case?
Okay, sorry. So
So now to take the point forward on better planning to avoid disputes, Neha, what would the advice be? I mean, ideally, yes, a will needs to be there, but would you say a trust is a useful vehicle to look at, and how should one look at planning now in the light of this judgment?
So according to me, trust is a great vehicle. It should be made by everybody, because this is trust is one of the vehicles that actually you can define succession irrespective of your religion. So today we are talking only about Hindus, but whatever religion you are from, it doesn't matter. You can create a trust and you can decide how you want to bequeath your assets. So you don't have to rely upon your personal succession laws. And you can go ahead and define in the trust deed or trust document that who's going to be the person who will be getting the benefit from your assets which you are going to be passing on into the trust. And in case something happens to those people, then who will get the benefit? So you can include certain set of people, you can exclude certain set of people, you can include family only, you can include family and friends and charity. So it actually depends upon a person. So trust as such is a great vehicle for planning succession or planning how to pass the property on from me to whoever I want to pass it on to.
Okay, Mrs. Saluja, comment on this. Again, here are we talking about a trust being beneficial only particularly for ultra HNIs or HNI families, or is there a case here even for the more affluent urban Indians to consider this structure and not just a plain will?
No, there are various reasons why people create trust. It's not, yes, one fact is that today most of the ultra HNI is going for trust, but trusts also have other advantages. If you have a special child in your family, you want him to be looked after you're gone, or if you've got certain debts in your business that need protection, that the family liquidity doesn't suffer if business goes through ups and downs. There are various reasons. So it's a little bit to do with understanding someone's needs and then deciding. But I think more importantly, even if you are not an ultra HNI but any other individual, having a will is a very disciplined part of financial planning. It's making sure that you clearly inform the next generation or even have a conversation with them on how the assets will be passed on, and it avoids disputes in future. So it's an important part of financial planning, as I would call it. So everyone is either a will or a trust, depending on your each individual specific requirements, are a must today. As wealth managers, we always recommend. And like I mentioned, after this, new act, one has to take a look at the will that you've created, look at the trust, and see what are going to be the implications of it. To give you an example, many people, let's say, have inherited a business across generations, and they have a daughter who's also a shareholder in the business. So people look at creating like a financial pool. They value what would be the daughter's share, either in the business or in real estate, and then create a financial sort of asset or a pool that can be handed over to her. And more importantly is the message. The message is, not only ancestral, but even self-acquired property. I think the message the judgment is giving is that daughters are as important. And whether, because it's a mindset in India that after the daughter gets married, then all the assets should remain with the son and nothing should be given to the daughter, or very little. But this judgment clearly tells you that the way it's being perceived is that son and daughters are on the same footing, and be it self-acquired or ancestral, I think the patriarch needs to plan how he's going to equally divide his assets between the children.
That's an interesting point. Neha, let me toss that to you. Do you think this judgment will have a bearing even on self-acquired property, not just property that, gets handed down from my grandfather or great-grandfather, but property that my living father today has acquired or is acquiring with his own money? Will this judgment perhaps have a bearing on what claim I can stake on that property?
So this position was already clear, Surbhi. Actually, this is a position which was already clear, that the assets which are self-acquired, how they are going to be disposed of by a Hindu. So when we talk about if the assets are acquired by me during my lifetime, I can dispose it off during my lifetime the way I want to, or by a will. So I can write a testament to it, that how would I want to put give my assets, and to whom would I want to give it to. So if I do not make a testament, so I'm not if a man doesn't make a will, then of course the intestate succession come into place, which actually means that everybody, as Mr. Saluja said earlier, so everybody can state claim in that. So their mother, wife, children, everybody will get a claim in a male Hindu's property. So as he said that the wealth managers as well as the lawyers, we all actually tell the clients that will is like a basic, like how you go in for a health checkup, you need to get a will in place. You need to make a will.
And it's often ignored.
Absolutely, I completely get that. Yes, Mr. Saluja, take your point. So since both of you are emphasizing so much on the importance of will, I think we should quickly round this conversation up by telling our viewers how they can get one. Neha, correct me if I'm wrong, we've had a discussion on this earlier as well. Even if you write out your will on a piece of paper, have two witnesses sign it, it would be held valid in a court of law. However, why should one then go through the process of getting the will validated?
Absolutely. So I will give you an answer to that. So when I make a will, I'm not keeping will. So let's take an example of today's scenario. I get COVID, and if I decide to go ahead and create a will, I get two witnesses who most probably are going to be my neighbors or my dear friends or my relatives who are going to sign. And then in dire states, I have made my will, and probably it might not be the correct situation or correct way of giving the assets. I should have consulted a lawyer. I should have consulted somebody to tell me that how is the right method. Should I be taking a doctor's certificate? Though I have got it witnessed, I have got it validated. It makes a lot of sense to take an external opinion about how should I go about it. Am I going up? Is this the right direction I am going in? So a lot of time people make silly mistakes in the will, which can make the will challengeable. So why to leave that open-ended will? Rather than that, create something which is foolproof, which is something that will not be challenged. Let's not keep confusion for the people who are going to survive us.
Got that. Got that. Mr. Saluja, quick last 30 seconds. Final word with you, your piece of advice.
So, first and foremost, like I mentioned, mindset change of men that daughters and sons have equal rights. Second is to create and have that discipline of creating a will. Often this gets ignored for simple reasons like you don't want to share financial information with your next generation, or sensitivity related to sharing decisions and having conversations, or just plain laziness. So keeping aside this judgment, the fact is that tomorrow there may also be estate duty, right? So either a trust or a will needs to be created. You need to seek legal counsel to help you determine how this is all foolproof, so that there are no disputes going forward. And also you have to rework now your wills and trusts based on this judgment, keeping in mind the likely change of the share of your property, ancestral property, and the rights of your daughter going forward. So idea should be ensure negligible changes or disputes within a family that can affect either your business or liquidity or even harmony between the family members. So having that transparent conversation and actually penning it all down together is very, very critical, and keeping.
Sure. Well, yeah, absolutely. So keep it clear and pen it down, make it very, very transparent. I guess that's the clear takeaway when it comes to succession planning. Thank you very much, Neha, as well as Mr. Saluja, for joining us. That's a wrap on this episode of Money, Money, Money. Do send us your feedback and keep watching, because news and updates continue on CNBC TV 18.